Hi, welcome to Coding Bootcamp's YouTube channel. Subscribe now and join our live stream session later. See you.
Hey, welcome back, guys. Good to have you here. In this session, we're going to start working on the projects. So thus far, we have covered JavaScript concepts using PowerPoint slides or Google Slides. I will be taking a more hands-on approach from now on. So you will see me coding a bit and focusing less on the slides. We have to apply what we learned in the previous sessions and understand how we can use JavaScript to manipulate the HTML files. Okay, so before we begin, let's look at the session outline. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to recap what we learned in previous sessions and understand how we can apply this in this project. The next one is we're going to understand how we can manipulate the DOM to get the user inputted information, and we have to get this information and do some calculations on top of it and display the results, right? So what is the actual project that we are building, right? So we'll see that after we're done with recap. So in this session, we're going to be building a simple calculator application. The scope of the application is just the user enters two numerical values, and depending on those values, we perform some calculations and display the result, right? So let's go ahead. All right, so this is the project scope. So we'll create a simple HTML page, a simple HTML form that will collect two values from the user and perform these arithmetic operations. So the requirements for this project are you need to have a code editor installed, like Visual Studio Code or Sublime Text, and a web browser installed, ideally Google Chrome. I have all these tools installed, so I will not be installing them again. But if you don't, please go ahead and install them. The project source files are available on GitHub. So if you remember, like we discussed in the session 1, GitHub is a source control. Oh, sorry, Git is a source control, but GitHub is a place where we can store our source code. So I have this GitHub page, and you can access this project source files over there. You can download it, and you can use it for your review. All right, so the first thing we have to understand is we have to manipulate the DOM using JavaScript. So before we do that, we have to first build a HTML form, get the user inputted values in there, and then access those inputted values using JavaScript. So let's actually begin coding. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create a folder on my desktop and call it a projects folder. I'll store all my projects in this folder. So I'll create another folder called calculator, since that's our first project. And I will open up this folder in Visual Studio Code so that we can create all the necessary files for this project. Alright, so now that the folder has been created, let's create our first file. I'm going to name this file as index.html. Right. Let me get rid of this sidebar. Okay, now let's first think about how we're going to create this project. So let's create an outline. So what are the main essential components that we need to create a calculator? So we need a number. We actually need two numbers. Let's create a very simple calculator with just arithmetic operations on two numbers. Right? So we need to get two numbers from the user, and we need to show the arithmetic operation result to the user when the user selects appropriate appropriate arithmetic operation that they want to perform on those two numbers, right? So if it's 5 and 6 and they want to add, so we'll have an add button. When they click on it, they will see the result as 11. Okay, so let me go ahead and add a boilerplate code. Now this particular project, I'm not going to cover HTML and CSS. You should already be familiar with that. But that said, I will add some boilerplate code in here, as well as add Bootstrap, that is the CSS framework, so that a project has some sort of structure and it does not look as ugly as we would like. So I just added a boilerplate code, and I'm going to name this as calculator application. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add Bootstrap. All right, so this is good. Now we'll add the script tag in just a moment here, but let's first add the HTML for accepting two numbers from the user. So I'm going to go ahead and create a form. I close this up, and I'm going to name this form as calculator. You'll see just in a moment why I named this form calculator. And let me get two numbers from the user. So the way we get two numbers or any inputted value from the user is we use the input tag. So let's create number 1, number 2, and I'm going to use an input tag here. So what attributes do we need for the input tag? So we need a type of text. We need a name, and I'm going to name this as number 1. So I'm going to remove the space. All right, and at the end of this, I'm going to add a break tag. All right, so that looks fine. Let me just reuse this again and change this to number 2. All right, so we have our two input fields for accepting two user values. Now we need to show them in a result. Right, so I'm just going to use input tag again to show the results. So I'm going to say get results, get result, and reuse this. And this will say total. All right. Okay, so we have 3 input values where we can get user input and display the result. Now we need some sort of trigger to execute our JavaScript, right? So what we will do is we will add a set of buttons that will hold our logic for the arithmetic operations that we want to perform on these two numbers. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a group of buttons for the arithmetic operations that we want to perform. So if you remember that we saw in the slide the kind of arithmetic operations we want to perform. So these were addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and modulus. So we'll need at least 5 buttons. So let me go ahead and create those. All right, so I'm going to use Bootstrap for grouping these buttons together. So let's say class of container, class of row, and I'm going to create every other as a class column. Oh, come on. All right, so let me create the first button in here. So I'll say input type of button. I'll say value is, let's say, addition. and on click. Now when we click on this button, we want to execute the JavaScript. So I'm just gonna keep this blank for just a moment, and we'll get back here. Right, so this is for addition, and I'm just gonna reuse this code again for the other operations. So we have addition. Now we need one for subtraction. So I'll say sub. We need one for multiplication. We need one for division, and one as modulus. Alright, so let's first check out and see if this HTML code that we have entered is correct and everything looks in order. So now to run this application, what you can do is you can click on the index.html directly, like let's say I go in here and I say open with Google Chrome, and this will work. Okay, so this looks a bit ugly, I admit that, but we're not concerned about the aesthetics of this application, but the functionality. So you can either double click on that file and open this up and in this fashion, or the way I recommend is starting a live server so that you can make sure all the index.html as well as any of the CSS files or JavaScript files that we'll create in the next sessions will be loaded correctly. So what we can do is we can add a live server extension to our code editor. So I'm using Visual Studio Code, and most of the code editors will have some sort of extension. All you have to do is figure out a way how to install it. So I'm going to go ahead and, okay, this is not the Visual Studio Code editor. Okay. All you have to do is go ahead and install this extension for your particular code editor. So in Visual Studio Code, all I can do is select the extensions tab right on the left hand side here. Click on it, and I'm going to search live server. All right, so this is the one that I want, and I'm going to install it. Now once you install this, notice you get an option of go live on the bottom right corner of the screen. I'm going to close this again. Now you have go live option here, so all I can do is select this and it will start a server and open up the application. Now if you notice the URL here, it shows my local host address and the port that the server is running on. Now of course you can customize this port according to your needs, but I'm not going to cover this. I'm not going to cover the change of port in this session. So I'm going to keep this running. So if we make any changes overall to the code, they will be reflected here. So let's try to click on any one of these buttons, and if you notice, nothing happens, right? So let's now start by adding our JavaScript logic here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a script tag in the head section of the HTML and add all our logic for these arithmetic operations that we want to perform. Okay, so let me collapse this. Let me open this up, and let me go ahead and add some space so that I can work. I'll add a script tag. Say language. We don't need to add language, I don't think it's necessary, but I'm just gonna add it so that I don't get any errors. So I'll say JavaScript type of text and JavaScript.
Thanks for watching. Feel free to add your questions as comments down below.
Alright. If you remember how to create function, we use the function keyword followed by the function name. So in this case, it is going to be addition, and now I want to access two values, the two values that the user has inputted. So I need to store those values in variables, right? So first of all, how do we access these values, right? So if we scroll down and if we understand this, that we have two input tags, right? And each one of them has a different name. So what we can do is we can access them by the name, but before we access the input tag, we need to understand that input tags are a child element inside the form element, right? So we first have to access the form and then go and make our way into these input tags, right? So let me first create two variables so that we can understand much more clearly. So I'll create var a, come on, var a equal to, say I'll put it a blank string for now. So the user has inputted values in the input box, but they are in the format of text, right? So we have a type of text. Now we want them in the number format. So I'm going to use the number function that the JavaScript provides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say number, and in here I want to access the form and then the value inputted by the user for number one. So how do we do this? If you remember DOM, the way we access it, we use the document object, then we add a period, and we want to access the form first. So the form name is calculator, so I'll just say calculator, and now I want to access number one. Okay, so the first number I want to access, so I'm going to say number one, and I want to access its value, so I'll say value. I'm going to do the same thing for the second number. Yeah, so now we have the two variables here that hold the value of the numbers that the user has inputted are going to perform the arithmetic operation, right? So we store the value of this arithmetic operation in a different variable. So let me define a variable. So I'll say variable c to a plus b, right? Since we're doing addition, I've added the plus symbol right here. So now what we want to do is we want to display the value of c into the third input box that we had created. So the third input box was get result. Now the way I can access it is by accessing the total attribute, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say document dot calculator dot total, since the name of the input tag is total, and I'm going to set its value to C. Alright, so I think this looks good. So let's test this out. Our server is already running, so it should work. Okay, I think the tab got closed here. So what's the port here again? It's 5500. So let me go to localhost 5500. Right. I'm going to add two values. So let's say 2 and 10. Okay, it does not work. Why does not it work? Oh, I got an error. Okay, so this This is fine. We don't need to worry ourselves about this error. This is a bootstrap error. Now this is not working. Why is it not working? Oh, you know why? Because we just created a function and never called it, right? So what we need to do is we need to add this function to the button that we had already created. So you remember this? I left this purposefully empty. So we need to call that function that we just created in here. So what I can do is I can just say addition and just call it. But I'm gonna add a JavaScript here so that it knows to access the script tag. Okay, and let me add a semicolon. I think we're good to go. Let's go here. Say 2, 10, add 12. We get 12. Let's add a big number here now. Let's say 1,000 and 5,000. Yep, we get it. We get the correct result, right? So let's try subtraction. Doesn't work. Multiplication doesn't work because we haven't written functions for those. So let's write the functions for those and then call this function in the on-click method right here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just copy and paste this and just change the operator right here, because since we are dealing with only 3 numbers, right, so 2 are the input and 1 is the output, so we can use this same code again. So let me create first the functions that we want. So we have function subtraction, and we have multiplication as well as division. And we have modulus. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste all of this into these functions. Now ideally what you can do is you can create one function to access the values and then call that function every time, but for the sake of creating this simple, we are just reusing this again and again for each function. So we just got done with subtraction. Now we go ahead in multiplication, just change the operand right here, save this. We got done with multiplication. Let's add the division. Alright, so division is done. Let's add in modulus. So if you remember modulus sign, right here. Alright, so let's just save this and go back to our application. I'll just remove this white space right here. Okay. Oh, you know what? I actually forgot to add the function again to the on-click event. So let me do that real quickly. So we need to add subtraction, multiplication, division, modulus right here. So expand this, and I'm going to type JavaScript subtraction, JavaScript multiplication, and one for division, and one for modulus. All right, so I think we're done here. We can go back to the application, see if this works. Right, so let's take, say, two numbers. Let's check out addition, it works. Subtraction, it works perfectly fine. Let's do multiplication, it works. The division works too. And the modulus is 0 because, yeah, that is correct, the modulus is 0. Right, so let me add this as 33, 320. Addition, modulus is 0. That's working fine. So let's play with some numbers here. Let me add a smaller number. So let's say this is 10 and this is 1000. Divide, you get a negative symbol right here. So this is working perfectly fine. Divide, you get in decimal. And the mod is 10. Yep, this works perfectly fine. But looks like it works, guys. The application is done. So now what we can do is we can improve on this project. You can style it correctly. You can add a better looking button. If I go back to our code, we can probably refactor it a bit. I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to give you some tips on how you can refactor the code. Right, so if we go on to the script, if you see, we have 4 different functions for 4 different operations, and for each function we are getting value from the user. So what you can do is you can write one function where you get the value, and you can rerun this function for each of these operations instead of writing these 2 lines each and every time. You can also create a separate function for displaying the result, right? And if you want to compress this more, what you can do is you can write a single function calling it arithmetic operations, and based on what the user clicks, you can just write a switch case where you inject the operator based on the user click on the buttons. Okay, that's one way to do it. And I think we're done with this project right here. Yep, we are done. So let's now go back to the slides. Let me close this. I don't need the bootstrap. Right, so we got done with the printing of results to the DOM. We attached the event handler for onClick. We actually didn't attach the event handler, so we actually directly added the function into the onClick event, and we displayed the result in the last input box. And this is the project, right? So there are a few resources that I've added. So if you want, you can expand on this calculator. You can work on creating a scientific calculator or a mortgage calculator, right? So you can go to these links and understand this concept more thoroughly by practicing. Okay, and this concludes for project 2. I'll see you in, sorry, this concludes project 1. I'll see you in project 2. Take care. Bye-bye. Hey, welcome back, guys. Good to have you here. Previous project was fun, right? We created a simple calculator application using just HTML and JavaScript. However, in this project, we're going to dive a bit deeper into JavaScript. So before we do that, let's look at the session outline. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to recap the previous project and understand how this project is different from the previous project. The next thing we're going to understand is how to use JavaScript to manipulate the DOM. We're going to get quite a bit of information from the user. We're going to ask user to input some information, and we're going to take this information and show it on our application. So we have to understand how to manipulate the DOM into getting this information that the user just entered and showing it on the application.
If you have enjoyed watching this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
So that means updating the DOM using this information. So we'll be covering both of these in a short while. So let's begin. So recap. So what did we do in the previous session? So we created a simple calculator application. We had a HTML file that had all the code in it, right? We wrote the JavaScript into the script tag itself. But in this application, what we are going to do is we are going to separate out the JavaScript into its own file. The reason we do this is it becomes manageable if we were to build a more complex and more wide application. So it is easier to separate out the functionality of the application and the aesthetics of the application. So aesthetics and the templating will be handled by the HTML and CSS, but the functionality is handled by the JavaScript. So it is always best if we keep them separate. So let's look at what kind of project we're going to build. So we're going to create a simple to-do application for this project. Let's first look at the scope of the project. So we're going to create a simple HTML application that takes the user inputted to-dos and displays them in a list format. So the page that I'm envisioning right now is we will have a single user input box where the user can add his or her tasks and have a button that says add. When the user clicks on this button, the information that you added in the input box has to be added on to the list. So let's see how we can develop this. Before we begin, we need to know if we have Visual Studio Code or Sublime Text or any sort of code editor installed on our computer, as well as Google Chrome. I already have installed on this computer, so I will not be doing this, but if you don't, please go ahead and install these tools. And as always, the source files are available on my GitHub page, so you can download the source code and review it. Alright, so let's first look at how we can manipulate the DOM. So before we jump into the slides, let's actually start coding directly. Alright, I'm going to start by creating a new folder inside my projects folder. I'm going to name this folder as to do. I'm going to open up this folder in Visual Studio Code Editor and create two files. One file to write all of the HTML and one file to write all of my JavaScript. So in the index.html file, we'll add the basic boilerplate code like we did in the last session. I'll add the bootstrap CDN to get started. I'll just copy this here, add it just above the title. And I will change the title to application. Inside the body element, we'll create two HTML elements required for this project. One is the input element and one is the button. But before I do that, let me create a master div inside which I will add the header tag and write the name of our application. Now we'll go ahead and create these two elements that are required for this application. So first one is the input and the second one is the button. Okay, let me remove this extra space right here. Now for the button, I will give this an ID of task. I will add this of type text, and I will also add a placeholder of add task. I'll make sure I close this. Inside the button element, I'll add the ID of add, I'll add the type of button, and the label for the button I will say is add task. So this is enough for now, but we will definitely need to include the bootstrap classes that I have added. So let me go ahead quickly and add these bootstrap classes. Alright, I'll start by adding the bootstrap classes right here. Even for the input element, I'll add the class of form control. For the button, I'll add a class of button and button outline secondary. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to add this button into a different div so that I can make sure that the input element is adjacent to the button element. So I'll add a class of input group append, and right after this div I will add a horizontal line and create another div to display the to-dos. I'll add a class of container and give it an ID of to-dos. Let's go ahead and check this application real quick. I'll open up with the live server. And so this is how the application looks, which is fine. Let us go back and add the JavaScript for this application. So before I do that, I have to add the script tag right here, just before I close the body element. Give it a source of to-do.js. Okay, now let me go back into the to-do.js and start coding. Alright, inside of here, first of all, let's walk through the steps we need to take to build this application. So I'll just write these steps down. So first is to get the to-dos from user. Okay, second is to store these to-dos in local storage. The third would be to retrieve the to-dos from the local storage. Fourth would be to display the to-dos on application. Okay, and the last one is we want the user to delete the completed to-dos. So delete the completed to-dos. Right, excellent. Let me just comment this out so we know what we are working on. Now let's begin writing the code for getting the to-dos from the user and storing them in local storage. To accomplish this, let's write a function to add the tasks that the user needs to complete inside our local storage. So I'll start by creating this function. And for this, we'll have to get the task from the user. We do this by accessing the value that the user adds in the input element of our application page. So the input element is right here. We get its value by accessing this element by its ID using the document.getElementById. So let me go ahead and add this here first. So before I add this here, I have to create a variable to hold this value. So let me create a variable called task, and I will say document.getElementById. The name of the ID was task, and I'll need to access its value. Alright. So now the user will have multiple tasks, so it's best if you use array to store these multiple tasks. So we'll create a new array. So I'll say var to-do is equal to new array, and we will add the user added task into this to-do array. Do you remember how to add the elements into the array object in JavaScript? We use the push method on the array object to insert a new element into the array. So in this case, it will be todos.push, and I will say task. Okay, next we want to store this array inside of our local storage. Now, if you remember your HTML5 fundamentals and local storage, the local storage is a web storage API object that stores data in a key value pair format. We use the setItem method on the local storage object to store this array. Now, to store this array, we need to convert it into a string first. So we will have to use json.stringify to take this JavaScript object and convert it into string. So the way we would do this is we would first write down the local storage, invoke the setItem method, add a key value. So the key I'm assigning this is to do. And after this, I'm going to be storing this array in a string format. So I'll say json.stringify and to-dos. Alright, now let's run this function when the user submits the task on our application, for which we will need to attach a add event listener function on the button element. So we have the button element right here, and listen to the click event. Once we record the click event, we need to run this add function. So let me go ahead and add this right outside this function. So I'll say document.get element by id, and I'll say add, and I'll attach a event listener. Now listen for the event of click. Once we listen to the event of click, we want to run the add function. So I'll say add. Alright, so now let's test this application thus far and see if we can add user inputted tasks in local storage. So I'm in my browser. I will open up the developer tools, and I will head off into the application and select the local storage. You can just ignore this. This is something I was testing before. I'll just clear this. Let's start by adding a new task. Alright, so the task 1 is being added in here with the key of to do and the value of task, that is an array. Let's add a few more tasks. Alright, so when we add tasks, the task 1 gets deleted and the task 2 is added. So we will have to make some changes to the existing code to fix this. So what we need to do is to declare a new array for storing the to-dos only if the to-dos array exists in our local storage. If the to-do array exists, then we need to retrieve and add new tasks to it. Now the way we can achieve is to write a new function that will retrieve an existing to-dos array. So let me go ahead and create this function. I'll call this function as get to-dos. You'll see why we separated this out in a different function, as we will need to retrieve stored to-dos multiple times. Alright, so inside of here we will create a new array. I'm just going to use this line over here and move it inside. Okay, we also need to create a variable to store the existing to-dos from the local storage. So I'll create a variable existing to-dos. So I'll create a variable existing to-dos to store the existing to-dos from local storage. In this case, we'll use the getItem method on the local storage object and access the existing to-dos by referencing the key, which in our case is to-do. So if you remember, this is the key that we used. Okay.
Thanks for watching. Please like and share this video.
So let's write this out. So we'll say local storage dot get item, and the key we're looking for is to do. Right, now we need to check if the existing to-dos variable we just created is null or not, because if the to-dos don't exist in local storage, this right here will return null, which means we have to use the newly created array, which is this one right here, to store the user to-dos. Okay, but if the existing to-dos is not null, that means the to-dos exist in local storage and we assign them to this variable. Okay, so let's go ahead and write this if statement to check this condition. I'll say if existing to-dos not equal to null, then do something. Now in here, now remember we stored the to-dos array in a string format, but if we have to add new tasks to this array of to-dos, we need to convert it back into a JavaScript object. To do this, we'll use the JSON parse and assign this to-dos variable, assign this to the to-dos variable that we created earlier. So we'll assign it to this. Okay, so let's say to-dos equal to json.parse, and I'll say existing to-dos. And after this, we will just return existing to-dos. Now remember, this function will only return one value for to-dos. Either it will return a blank array, or it will return existing to-dos in local storage if they exist. Now let's test this application if this runs. Looks like the server is already running. So let me go back in here. You already have task 2. Let's add task 1. Okay, I'm getting an error right here. It says to-dos.push is not a function because I missed something. Okay, yes. So if you remember this, I moved this from the add function right here. So what I will do is I'll create a variable of to-dos and get these to-dos from this function right here. So it will either be existing to-dos or a blank array. So I'll say get to-dos. I'll save it. I'll go back. You can ignore this error. This is a jQuery error. I'm not really concerned about this. So I'll just add the task 1 again. Okay, I got one more error. It says to-dos.push not function. It says on line 13. Or to-dos equal to get to-dos. Okay, so this should run. What's wrong with here? Let's do a little debugging. Okay, I found the error right here. We need to return the to-dos, not the existing to-dos. Let's go back and check this once again. So the task 1 gets added. Let's add a few more tasks. Alright, so this looks good. Now let's add the code to show the to-dos we have stored in our local storage right here. So if we go back, we close this up so I can get some space. Now we'll start by creating a new function called show. So we'll create a new function called show. Now first we need to get the existing to-dos from the local storage. This is where this get to-dos function which you wrote will prove useful. So let me get the existing to-dos first. So I'll say var to-dos equal to get to-dos. We need to display these to-dos in our application. How will we do this on our application page? If you remember, we created a div in the HTML file specifically to display these to-dos. We will have to attach an HTML element to this div. We will need to access it using JavaScript and add to its inner HTML property. Now let's write the code to do so. So let me go back and add this code right here. I'll say document.getElementById. The ID for that div right here was to-dos. So I'll say to-dos dot inner HTML. Now here, what kind of HTML element you want to display these to-dos in? I believe a list format can be useful, so I'm going to create an unordered list for each to-do item, one line at a time. The inner HTML takes a string, so we'll have to compose a string first. So I'll leave this blank for now, and we will work on composing the string that we will then assign it here. So I'll start by creating a variable called HTML and assign a unordered list tag to it. So I'll say unordered list. Okay, now I need to add a list tag on each line for each to-do that is stored in an array. In order to do this, we need to loop over the array and get each individual values which can be attached to the list tag. So the way we do this is by running the for loop on the to-dos. So I'll say var I equal to 0, I less than to-dos dot length I plus plus, and inside here I will just concatenate the list item for with the unordered list element right here. So I'll just say HTML plus equal to, and I will say list div paragraph plus to-dos I, close the paragraph and the div and the list element. Alright, here each element from the array will be added inside the paragraph tag right here. Now let's finish up the HTML string by adding the closing bracket for the unordered list. So right after this I will say HTML plus equal to, and I will close the unordered list. Now we attach this HTML string that we have just composed to the inner HTML property of the div element that we accessed earlier. So it was this, and we will assign this right here. Alright, so now the show function is complete for now. Let's call this function at the end of our file. So I'll say show here. And also we need to call this inside the add function. So let me go back into the add function. Call it again right here. The reason we do this is because we want the DOM to be updated when a new task is added by the user. So we'll actually call the show function right here again. So now let's test this out and see if the to-do stored inside the local storage in our application page are displayed on the application page. I'm sorry. So looks like the server is already running. Let me go back, and here it is. Okay, so we were successful in displaying the existing to-dos onto the application page. The next thing we have to do is give the user the ability to delete any completed to-dos, for which we will need a delete button for each of the to-do that is being displayed. Let's add the delete button to each of the to-do that we display. I will add a few more div and utilize the bootstrap classes to make sure I have the delete button right next to each to-do. So let me add this real quickly and you will visit the code. So I will add the code right here. Alright, so I added the code right here. Now if you notice this, I added a class of remove to this button element right here. So I created a button element and added a few classes in here, and remove is one of the class that I assigned it. Now I also assigned the ID attribute to the value of I, which means now we can identify which delete button is associated with which to do in the array. Now the reason I added the class of remove is so that I can access the delete buttons with however many tasks exist in an array, and I can attach event listener for each one of them. You will see now why this is a better approach. So let's first look at how these delete buttons look. So yeah, so the delete buttons that I just added right now work. I mean, they're displayed, but they don't work actually. So we have to write the code to attach event listener for each one of them. Okay, so let us go back and attach it to them. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get all of these buttons in one go. So go ahead and right here, let me define a new variable to store all the button elements in the application. So I'll just create a variable called buttons, and I will use the document.getElement by class name, since I used the class of remove right here, and do this. Okay, so I got all the buttons. Now I need to loop over all of these buttons one by one and attach an event listener. So let me go ahead and add that real quick. 0 I less than length I plus plus, and inside for each button I'll add a event listener. The event that we're listing for is the click, and I'll add a remove function. Now we haven't returned the remove function, but we need to write this function right now and run it every time the user clicks. Okay, so let us write this function real quick outside of the show function. So I'll just create a new function called remove. Okay, so now the first thing I need is the ID of the button that has been clicked, which will give me the element inside the array to be deleted. Now, if you remember, we had already added an ID. So the way we can access this is by using the following code. Let me first write up the code and let me explain it later. So I'll say var ID equal to this dot get attribute of ID. Okay. Now, do you remember this keyword which we learned in session 2? This keyword refers to the current object in a method or a constructor. By using the get attribute, we get the ID attribute for each and every specific element, right? So if I click on this button right here, I will get the ID of 0 because that's the 0th position inside of this array. Okay, so now let me get the existing to-dos first.
Thanks for watching. Feel free to add your questions as comments down below.
Say get to-dos. Now we delete the element from the array using ID, which is the position at which the to-do is stored, right? So I'll say to-dos dot splice. So this is a method on the array object. After we do this, we need to add this updated array into the local storage again, for which we will use the setItem method again. So I'll use local storage dot setItem, use the key, and again stored in a string format. I will say to-dos. Now this is completed. Okay, now we need to call the show function again inside this remove function, because the to-dos in the array are being updated. That means the DOM needs to be updated as well. So I'll just say show again. Alright, so this looks good. Let's go ahead and test this out. So deleting task 2 did not work. Let me go into the console and see why. It says button is not defined. It shows on line 49. So let me expand this real quick. Okay, I missed the button, the yes here. We go back, delete task 1. Okay, so task 2, sorry, task 2 was deleted successfully. Now if you look at the array, I can delete the task. I can also add the task. So let's add task 2 again. We add task 3, task 4, and let me add task n. Now let's say if I wanted to delete task 3, the task 3 is deleted from the DOM, as well as it's deleted from the array that is stored inside the local storage as well. Looks like everything worked as expected. That's excellent. Let's move back to the slides. So we covered everything from this slide onwards. So we covered manipulating the DOM. We also covered updating the DOM in real time when we use the show method. So I think we are good to go. We have completed all of these successfully. Here are some additional resources for you to improve on this to-do list. In the next session, we'll be covering project 3, for which we will develop a to-read book list. You'll see why this project is different from this one, although we are building the list again. So I'll see you in the next session. Thank you for learning with me. Take care. Bye-bye. Hey, welcome back guys to Introduction to JavaScript course. Good to have you here. Last project was interesting, wasn't it? In this session, we will be working on a project of similar nature. So who am I? I'm Kaustubh, but you can call me KG. We'll be working on this project together to understand the different concepts that we learned in session 3. So before we begin, let's look at the session outline. Firstly, we will cover the recap of what we did in the previous project and understand what we are going to do in this project. In this session, we will again visit on how to manipulate DOM, but we are going to be utilizing some very key concepts that we learned in the fundamentals of programming session. I believe that was session 3. We will explore JavaScript objects and classes and understand how we can use them in our projects. In the last session, we created a simple to-do list. We focused on getting the user inputted tasks and storing these tasks in the local storage. In this session, we're going to be doing something similar, but instead of storing one text at a time, we are going to be storing JavaScript object. So what is this project all about? So what we're doing is we're building a simple reading list. Let's look at the scope of the project to understand what we're trying to do. So we are going to be creating a simple HTML application that allows user to read list. I'm sure you must be having a list of the books that you want to read and the books that you have covered thus far. We're going to be building application of similar sorts, but we'll be using very simple concepts of HTML and CSS, but a bit complex concepts from the JavaScript. So let's begin. Before we begin, make sure you have all the requirements satisfied. So in this case, make sure you have a Visual Studio Code editor installed on your computer, as well as a Google Chrome browser. You can find the project source code files on my GitHub page. You can download them, review them, and make changes to it as you see fit. So let's begin. Before beginning in the PowerPoint slides, let's go back and code directly onto the Visual Studio Code. Alright, I'm going to begin by creating a folder inside my projects folder. I'm going to call this books list. I'm going to open up this folder in Visual Studio Code. Again, we'll create two files like we did last time, one for writing all our HTML and one for writing the JavaScript. So I'm going to call the JavaScript file as main.js. Let me close this. Alright, so in the index.html file, we will start with just enough HTML to get us started. I will add Bootstrap and we'll go from there. Alright, in here I'm going to be doing things a bit differently than we did last time. So in here I'm going to be using the actual form element, and for displaying the books, instead of using the unordered lists, we're going to be using tables. So how we may proceed. So let's create a container div first. I'm going to be using Bootstrap classes. So container is a Bootstrap class, and I'm going to be following the Bootstrap structure or order for this project right from the beginning instead of from later. So I'll say div and I'll create a row. Inside of this, I'll create div of class column of small. Inside of this, I'm going to be creating a form, and I'm going to be giving the ID of a form as book form. Inside of this, we'll have all of our form elements. So I will say form group. Let's create the first element. So the first element that we want is the title of the book. So for that, we need a label and we need the input element. So let me create a label first. So we need a label for title. Let me name this as title, and I'm going to be needing a input element of type text, an ID of title, and I'm going to be using Bootstrap class of form control. Alright, Later on, what I need are same two input boxes for author, the name of the author, and the ISBN number. So I'm just going to be copying this and making changes to the label as well as input. So let me quickly do that. Alright, so I have the ISBN number as well. I will also need a submit button for this form. So let me go ahead and copy and paste this, and instead of labels and inputs, I will just have the input. So for this, I will say type of submit. I don't need an ID because it's a form submit. The value will be submit. The classes are form control. Excellent. So let's save this and see how this looks. I'm going to be opening this up in the live server. So this is how the application looks, and which is fine. But what I want in this case now is I want this form on the left hand side, and on the right hand side I want to be able to show all of our books that we have stored in the local storage. So let's go and add that as well. So like I said previously, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be adding a table instead of lists. So what I will do is I will add another div. I'll add a class of column small. We'll have another div inside of this, and inside of this I will have table. The class I'm going to be using is for Bootstrap, and I'm going to be creating the header row. So I will say table head and scope of column, because I want them in a separate column. Again, this is a Bootstrap property. I'll say title, and I'll one for each one of them: the title, author, and the ISBN. All right, author and the ISBN. I want one more column for the delete button. So if the user wants to delete their completed books, the button should be displayed. So I'll create a blank one. I will leave this as blank. Okay. Now we will define the table body here with an ID of book list, because we need to access this from the JavaScript, and I'm going to keep this empty. So we'll be appending the table data inside of this. So let me make this a bit better and attach the script like here, as always, in the source of main.js. Right, let me save this and see how this looks. So perfect. So I have the form on the left hand side, and I have this table structure on the right. So let's go ahead and write some JavaScript to see how this will look. So let's begin writing the JavaScript for this application. But before we do that, I want to tell you that this is going to be a different project. So we'll be approaching this problem a bit differently than we did for the to-do list. In this project, we're going to...
If you have enjoyed watching this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Be using classes and constructors. Do you remember what classes and constructors are? We covered this in session 3. So if you're not familiar with them, I strongly urge you to test those out first, revisit that session, make sure you understand them, and then we can move on in this project. So we will be creating 3 classes. One is for the book. So we are going to be storing the book as a JavaScript object in the local storage array. We're also going to be separating out form and function. So form is the user interface and the function is the storing of the books. So we're going to be creating 3 classes. So let me write these classes down first. So I'll say class book UI and class storage. Okay, now the book is a JavaScript object that we will be storing in an array, and we're going to be storing this array inside the local storage. So what are the elements of this object? So if you look at our index.html file, we have 3 key input boxes. One is the title, one is the author, and one is the ISBN. So to store this, we are going to be creating a JavaScript object, and for this we're going to be needing a constructor. Okay, so every time when the user submits a new book, we're going to be creating an instance of this class, and we're going to be storing that. So let's create the constructor first. The 3 things that we need are title, author, and the ISBN. Okay, and I'm going to be creating a JavaScript object, so I will say this.title, and I'm going to be assigning to the title that we are going to be passing inside this constructor. So I'll say title. Same way for the author and the ISBN. Okay, so the way we want to create an instance of a book is when the user submits a form, right? So when the user submits a form, we have to capture that click event. It's the same way we did in the to-do list project, but in this case, we are going to be adding the event listener on the form itself rather than one submit button, right? So if you go back to the HTML file, scroll a bit up. So we have a form with an ID of book form. So I'm going to be attaching a event listener for submit. So submit is a event that we listen to on the form element, right? So let's go back and get this first. So I'll just create some space down here, and I would say document dot get element by ID and book form, because that is the ID that we have given to the form. And I'm going to be adding event listener. The event I'm listening to is submit, and I'm going to be passing in a function with the event. Okay, so inside of here, what we need to do is we need to access the values that the user has entered in these input elements. So let me create variables to store them. So I will say variable title equal to document dot get element by ID. Do you remember what the ID was for the title? So it was title, it's author for author, and the ID for ISBN is ISBN. So let me quickly write these down. Dot value. I'm going to just copy and paste this and change the values in here. So we have author, the ID is author, and we have ISBN with a value of ISBN. Okay, excellent. Now we have three things that are required to create a book object. So what we will do is we will create an instance of that class, the book class, and the way we do is we will say constant book equal to new book, and we'll pass in the title, author, and the ISBN. So we'll say title, author, and the ISBN. Okay, great. Now we need to store this inside our local storage, right? So if you remember what we did in the local storage in the last project, we only had two functions that were key. One was to store the item and one was to get the item. So we will write the functions for these two particular functions that we need to perform inside the storage class. So let me go ahead and write these real quick. So the first thing is to add the book list, right? Add the book inside the local storage. So let me create a function. I'm going to be using static here. I'll just say add book, and I'm going to be passing in the book that we just created. So book just created right here. Okay, so in here again, now in this case, what if the book already exists in the local storage, right? So we'll have to first get the existing books in the local storage, and based on that we have to decide if the book already exists and attach it to that existing book list rather than creating new one. So we'll have to create the get books function first before we do this add book function. So let's do that. Again, it's the same thing that we did in the to-do application. We are just doing a bit differently in this, right? So, oops. Okay. So in here, I will create a blank array. So I'll say var books equals blank array. And you remember what we did last time? So we used a conditional statement like if to see if the book already exists in the local storage. So I'm going to be passing the local storage.getItem directly into this if block and see if it's null. So I'll say if local storage.getItem, and the key I'm going to be storing this is as books, okay, is not equal to null. So if it is not null, then give me the existing books, right? So books equals JSON dot parse, and I'm going to be passing in the local storage. Okay, great. Now in here, this code can be improved a bit better, like how we did it in the last project. So make sure you take a look at this code as well as that code and see any improvements that you can come up with. And I'm going to be returning the books. Okay, all right, great. Now we have defined the getBooks function. We will get these books here. So I will say variable books equals, so we have to access the getBooks, and the way we do that is by using the class name and the function. Okay, so the way we do it is we will say storage.getBooks. All right, excellent. Now we have got the array, right? And we'll push our new book inside of this. So we'll say push Okay, something wrong here. Let's say books.push, I'm sorry, books.push, and we'll pass in the books. Okay, once we have done this, we'll update the local storage. So do you remember what was the method that we used to update the local storage? It was local storage dot set item, and the key that we used was books. And let's let's save this as a string instead of an array. So we'll have to use JSON.stringify. All right, great. Now let's save this and see how this looks. But before we do that, let me look if everything is correct right here. So we have created a book, but we haven't passed it inside the add book function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be calling that function. So remember what class is it in? Yes, it is in storage dot add book, and inside here, let's say add book. Okay, let's save this and see how this looks. I'm going to be right-clicking here and opening up my developer tools to see if I have any errors. So I have one error here. Again, this is a jQuery error. We can ignore that for the time being. Let me go to the application. Let me look at the local storage. There's nothing in here. So let me add the first book right here. So what book should we add? So let's add a book called Mastery by Robert Greene. I'm going to be entering a fictitious ISBN. So I will say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to be clicking on submit. So I clicked on submit and I did not get anything here. So let me reload this. Okay, so it looks like we have some sort of error here. Let's go back and see what we missed. Okay, so let's see what we did wrong here. Okay, so you see the mistake here. I've set this as books and I've used book. So let me save this and go back and see. So let me add the same titles here. Let me add the ISBN. Let me go to the application and see the local storage. So let me submit this book right here. And there it is. We have the book and we have stored this as a JavaScript object. So if we expand this, you can see author, the ISBN, as well as the title. All right. So if you notice one thing, this form actually captures the default event. So it actually clears out everything once it's submitted. So we want to avoid that. So let's add one more book in here. We'll add again Robert Greene's book. So I think it is called 48 Laws of Power. And the author is Robert Greene. We'll add a fictitious ISBN. So let's add 6789 and submit it. You notice here it clears everything out and it jumps. So what we can do is we can prevent it by default. My mistake. Prevent it by default. We'll go back and before we submit the book, we will add event.prevent default. Okay, great. The next thing we have to do is we have to display the existing books onto the DOM, right? So for that we have created a separate class of form, right? So let me go back. Let me actually close the storage for time being, and let's work on
Thanks for watching. Please like and share this video.
this UI class. Okay, so in this UI class, what we will do is we will write a function to update the table data. So if you remember in the index.html, we have created table. We have created the table head and the table body. Now inside the table body, we have to append a new table data, right? So we'll go back and we'll write a function saying add book to the list. And inside we'll again get the book. I will first get the list of books. So let me go back and see what the ID I have put in there. So the ID that I have is book list for the table body. So I will create a variable of list equals document.getElement by ID, and the name, the ID is book list. Right, now I have to create a new row. So the way I do this is by creating constant row equals document.createElement, and in here I'm going to be creating table row. Okay, and I'm going to be attaching the table data for this row, right? So I will say row.innerHTML equals, and here I will start adding one table data at a time. So I will say table data, and the way I can do this is I can use the object properties. So I'll say book.title, right, because we are attaching a book here, and we close the table data, and I'll be adding for author and the ISBN as well. So I'll say author and ISBN. Let me remove this extra space right here, save this, and now we have to append this list to the existing row, right? So what we need to do is we have to, we have to append the row to the existing list, my mistake. So we'll say list dot append. Now this will be a child of that, the row will be a child of this list. So we'll say append child, and we'll say row. Great, excellent. Now that we have done this, what we need to do is we need to create an instance of this UI and call this, right? So the way we do this, we will go back when we submitted the book. So we'll go back. Let me remove this extra space right here. And let me first create an instance. So I will add a instance of UI equals new UI. Okay, and I will call that function. Remember what function we wrote just now? So we wrote a function of add book to the list. And we will say UI dot add book to the list, and we'll pass in the book. Okay, let me save this and see how this looks. Okay, so this did not work. Let's see why it did not work. Okay, I see the mistake here. We have added this just in the submit button, but we also have to add it when we get new books, right? So get the books from the local storage. So what we will need to do is we'll need to write a new function here just to display the books. So let me create a function here real quick, right, to get all the updated books. So I will call this function as static display books. And inside here, let me get the books first. So I will say var books equals storage dot get books. And for each book, what I have to do is I have to create a new UI element. Right? So let's do this. Let's say books, since it's an array, and for each of these books, since now we are dealing with array of objects, right? So we cannot rely on traditional for loop. I mean, we can use traditional for loop, but for each is much better and much faster. So we'll use for each, and we'll pass in a function. And for each book, we'll create a new UI instance. So I'll say constant of UI equals new UI. And I will just call in that function of add books to the list. So I'll say UI dot add book to the list, and I will pass in the book. Right? Excellent. So let me save this and go back. So what seems to be the problem here right now? Why is this not working? Do you have any guesses? Right, so we created the display books function, but we never called it, right? So let us go back and see where we have to call this display book function, right? So we have to call the display book function when all of the HTML page is loaded, right? So we have to listen to a different event in here. We can write this function anywhere at the end of our JavaScript. So we can call it in here. So we can say storage dot display books. I think it's called display books. And this will still run. But we have to make sure that all the other DOM elements have been loaded. So I'm going to be adding an event listener to the entire document. And the event that we are going to be listening is DOM content loaded. Right, so let me actually comment this. You're going to be using this again. So I will add an event listener. And inside here, I'm going to be listening to an event that DOM content has been loaded. And I'm going to be passing in storage.displaybooks. Let me save this, remove this semicolon, and now see how this looks. There we go. So we got the books to be displayed on our UI. So let me add a few more books in here. So let me add a book called Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. Yeah, I'm not really sure on the spelling here, but I'm gonna add a fictitious ISBN. Submitted. There we go. We added a new book. Let's add a few more books. Excellent, excellent. Now, what we need to do is we need to be able to remove the books that we have read. So we have to create a delete button here, right? So we created a separate column in here just for the delete button, and we haven't written the delete button. So let me go back to the not the HTML but the JavaScript and add this delete button right there. Okay, let's go back. Let me scroll up. Do you remember where we are appending the book to the list? right here, right? So we will need to add a delete button right here. So let me go ahead and add this button. So I'm going to be adding a new table data element, and I'm going to be adding a button. So I'm going to be using the anchored tag here instead of the traditional button, since we have already used the button. Let's use something different here. So let's say href. It doesn't go anywhere, so anchor tag usually needs a reference. And I will use a class of bootstrap, so I'll use button danger, and I will just say x, just to delete it. Say anchor close and the table data close. All right, excellent. Oh, I realized my mistake here. I did not add a semicolon here. Okay, great. All right, so let us go back and see if this has been added. Great, so we already have a button. This looks a bit ugly, but you can always improve on it. Now we have to attach event handler of click for this button. So do you remember how to do that? We already covered this in the last project. Right, so let's go ahead and see how we can do this. All right, so for attaching the event listener here, we're going to be approaching this problem a bit differently than how we did in the last project. So instead of attaching event listener for each one of these buttons, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be attaching an event listener on the table data itself, right? So let me show how this will look. Let me first close this up and make some space. All right, so in here, I will say document dot get element by ID, and in here I'm going to be calling the table data, right? So the table data here is the book list. So I will say book list, and I will add an event listener, and the event I'm listening for is click. In here I'm going to be writing a function, and I'm going to be passing in the event that we just captured. All right, great. Now we have to think about how we can remove each one of the element when the delete button is clicked. Okay, so in the previous project, how we did was we looked at the array and we looked at the position, and that's how we deleted it. But here we have a bit better advantage. If you go back and see, we have the ISBN. Now ISBN is a unique number that is given to each book. So this is a unique number that we can look for, and then we can delete it from our local storage. So how will we access this ISBN, right? So when we click on this button right here, we need to be able to somehow figure out what the ISBN number for this particular book is. And the way we do this is we will have to access the immediate neighbor of this button, the ISBN, get the number, look up that number in the local storage, and make sure we delete it. So how we may do this? Let's go back and see it. So in here, let me first get the target to see if I'm getting the event capture. So I already have passed event in this function. So let me first log this out to see if this works perfectly. So I'll say console.log and event. Let's see if this looks fine. So let me go to console. All right, so the event is logged here. So that's great. Now what we have to do is we have to check the target and traverse to the parent element. So we'll have to traverse back to the parent element of this entire element. So if we go,
Thanks for watching. Feel free to add your questions as comments down below.
Back and we check the target. So the target we already have right now is the anchor tag. Since we clicked that, we have to look for its parent element. So the parent element will be the book list. So let me scroll down here. So parent element. So the parent element is the table data, like we had the book list. Inside the table data, we will look at the previous element sibling. So the previous element sibling for this particular element is the ISBN, right? So I'll scroll down and I'm looking for the previous element sibling. Right, so the previous element sibling is another table data, and inside of here I'm looking for the ISBN. So if you notice this is a content that is being displayed on the DOM, so this will be inside the text content property. So if we scroll down here and look at the text content property, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is precisely what we need to access. Okay, I know this is a bit complicated, and it's a much more complicated than what we did last time, but the purpose of this complication is to make sure you understand how to traverse between these DOM nodes. So think of this path right here. So we selected this element, we attached an event listener to it. So on the click event, what we would do is we will move our pointer to the parent first. So if you remember the tree, so we have to go to the parent to go to the sibling, right? So we'll move to the parent. So parent is the table data itself, right? Move to the table data, then look at the sibling of that table data. So the table data here is the ISBN, and we'll get the text content out of it. So let us go back and access this. So the way we can access this is by e.target.parent element and the previous element. I'm sorry, it was the previous element sibling, not just the previous element. And the content that we're looking for is the text, so it was under text content. Let's save this and see what this logs out. So if I click on this, I should get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I click on this, I should get the ISBN. Same way right here. Now what we can do is we can pass this inside a function, the ISBN, and that function will be solely responsible to look up the book of this ISBN in the local storage and delete it. So let's write this function down. Okay, so let's call this function as remove. Okay, and now since this is a property of the storage class, it's wise to write this inside the storage because we'll be dealing directly with storage, right? So the reason we use the storage class is to make sure all the methods that are pertaining to storage will be stored in this class. So let me actually move this there. We go there, we close this up, and add a new function here. I'll remove this and I will add static remove. And what are we removing? The ISBN, right? Excellent. So now we have to traverse the local storage, look for that particular book and make sure that it is deleted. So let's get the books first. So we'll say var books equals the get books method. That will give us all the books. And now we will traverse through the list of books by using the for each function. For each function, book and here we go. Now in here we are going to be looking for the index as well, so we have to make sure we delete that specific index, right? So what we will do is I will pass in the index of the book inside the array, and I will see if the ISBN for that particular book matches the ISBN that we are passing in. So I'll say if book.isbn is equal to ISBN. Okay, and we remove it from the element, sorry, from the array. Remove this element from the array. So we'll say books.splice and the index. Okay, great. Now once we have done this, we have to update the local storage. So let me say local storage dot set item. Remember the key was for this, it was books, and I'm going to be updating this array. So we'll say JSON dot stringify books. All right, excellent. Now let's call this method on the click event for the delete button, right? So in here, instead of logging this out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be passing this inside the method itself. So let's first store this inside a variable. So I will say variable ISBN equals, and I will get all of this from here. Let me remove this log, it's not necessary. We'll save this, and I will pass this ISBN inside that function. So do a storage dot remove an ISBN. Excellent. Let me see if we haven't missed anything. Yeah, this looks good. This looks fine. Let us see if this works or not. So let me save this. Go back to the application, and let me remove this last book right here. All right, so the book was deleted. Same thing with Steve Jobs. Yes, the book is being deleted. Now all we have to do is make sure we update this DOM once the book is deleted from the local storage. Do you remember how to do that? We already covered this in the previous project. Before you follow with me along on this, try to figure this problem out, because we have already covered this in the previous project. You can watch the next few minutes of this video to understand how I'm solving it, but I would strongly encourage you to solve it on your own. All right, so could you solve this? If not, it's fine. This is a bit complicated. So what we will do is we will make sure that we get the target. So if you scroll down and see, we already have e.target. So when the button is clicked, so we have that button within our reach. What we will do is we will delete the entire table data row for that particular book. So we have to delete multiple things in here. So if you scroll back, we have to delete all of this within one single click, right? So this is a function of UI, so I'm going to write this method inside of UI class. So let me actually close this and write a new method here for deleting the book. So I'll say delete book, and I'm going to be passing in the book. Okay, now what I'm going to be passing in here is the target itself. So if I go back, we have the event target. So let's save this first. inside a variable called book, and I will say e.target. If you're curious to know what this is, let's log this out. Say console.log book. I'm saving it. Let's go back and see what it looks in the log. So if I press this, this is the target. So this was the target that I clicked on, and I need to access the class of this, right? So with the class of this, I'm going to be deleting everything that is before it. So each and every parent element for this particular section, this particular table data will be deleted. So I'm going to be accessing the class, making sure if the class is button and button danger, and then deleting all of the elements inside of it. So let me go back, remove this, and I'm going to be creating an instance of the UI object. So I'll say var UI equals new UI, and I'm going to be calling in UI.remove, and inside of here I'm going to be passing in the book. Save. Is it UI.remove? So let me look at the function that I just wrote. Oh, it's delete book, it's not remove. So let's change this to delete book. Okay, great. So in here I'm going to be checking if the class name is of button and button danger. So we have already passed in the book. So let's see if the class name for this book is of button and button danger, and we're going to be removing all of the parent elements associated with this. So oops, I forgot to open and close the brace for the if block. So I will say book dot parent element and its parent element and remove it. Let's save this and see how this looks. So I accidentally deleted all of the cache of my browser. So I'm going to be adding a few more books to test it again. So we have mastery. Let's add a few more. And let's see how this looks now. I'm not going to be adding more, but we have a problem here. This is not clearing up when the form is submitted. So we'll deal with that in just a second, but let's see if the delete button works. So it looks like it works. Let me check inside the local storage. So yes, the previous book, 48 Laws of Power, was deleted. Let me delete this book as well. Great. So this is just awesome. So now I've noticed one problem that is very annoying and I don't like it, is that this the information here stays on once you're submitted. So what I need to do is I need to clear this out. So I'll write a function inside the UI class to delete all of these input fields once the form is submitted. So let me go back and write this. I'll say clear fields, clear the input fields, and I will get each one of them. So each one of them, what's the ID for each one of them, do you know? So their title, author, and the ISBN. So let me first write this document dot get element by ID, title dot value, and I'm going to be setting this as blank. Okay, I'm going to be setting this for the rest of the two. So this is author and this is ISBN. So I'm going to be calling this function once we submit the form. So scroll down and we submitted the form. Okay, so here's the form.
If you have enjoyed watching this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Submission event, and after we have added the book, or after we have made changes, I'm going to be clearing this out. So I'll say UI, since we already defined the instance of this class, I'm sorry, and I'm going to be calling clear fields. Great. Let me go back and see if this works. So I'm going to be adding some different books now. I'll say Meditations, Marcus Aurelius. Let me add some fictitious ISBN. Alright, so it works. So it added a blank object in here. So we need to add a check to see if we're not adding extra or empty objects inside our database. That is one mistake that we don't want to have. Can you think of any ways where we can see if it'll work? I'll leave it up to you to see how to fix this problem. Could you solve this problem? I'm not going to solve this problem right now, but I will give you a small hint. You have to do a validation on these input elements. So what you have to do is check if any of these fields are empty. If they are not empty, then only you add them to the database. So what you will have to do is you'll have to go back inside of your submit event function, and you have to make sure that none of these have empty values. If they have an empty values, you'll have to show user the error saying that they have empty values, and if not, then you have to add them one at a time in the local storage. So this is it. You'll find the updated code on my GitHub page in case you get stuck in this form validation. Form validation is important. Please make sure you pay attention to it. And let us go back to the slides. So again, in the review, we already manipulate the DOM. We also updated the DOM in real time. And this concludes this project. So what we did differently than the previous projects, especially the last project with the to-do list. If you can list down the differences between that project and this project and understand how we did things here differently, then you will get a better understanding of how to use the concepts of JavaScript that we learned in session 3, session 4, as well as session 2. Okay, so here are a few resources for your review. You can dive deeper into them, understand how to manipulate the DOM. I have just scratched the surface here with the JavaScript and DOM manipulation, but there are so many things that you can learn, and the DOM or the HTML standards are changing often. So is JavaScript. Both of these technologies are evolving constantly, so I strongly encourage you to rely on these resources more and more to keep yourself updated. So here are a few JavaScript courses that you can take. Node.js. Node.js is a backend language, and the rest of the frameworks that you see, Angular, React, and Vue, are all the front-end frameworks. And here's another follow-up course that I take. It's with jQuery, JSON, as well as Ajax. So thanks for being patient with me. I hope you learned a lot, and this concludes our session. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey guys, congratulations on completing the Introduction to JavaScript Programming. My name is Kaustubh Gharge, and it's good to have you here. This is very good that you have completed this course. In this course, we covered various topics. We covered the basics of JavaScript programming. We understood the lexical structures, the expressions, types, strings, variables, and the other fundamentals of programming. We also covered the conditional statements and loops, and we covered the built-in functions that JavaScript offers, as well as we wrote some new functions. Okay, we also understood the difference between a web design and web development. And by now you must be feeling pretty confident about your skills as a JavaScript developer. Okay, so we implemented our JavaScript skills by building a few projects. So the first project we focused on was a simple calculator where you had the 4 basic arithmetic functions: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. In the second project, we utilized our skills for HTML5, which we learned in the previous course, or if you might have learned earlier, in which we use the local storage in combination with JavaScript to store the user to-dos, as well as build a book reading list. So congratulations on completing this class successfully. And if you want, you can take more follow-up courses. I recommend taking intermediate JavaScript with jQuery, JSON, and Ajax. And after that, you can focus more on the frameworks such as Angular, React, or even Express and Node.js. So thank you for taking your time and have a good day.